Reverend Smith, we were just talking about what drove you, what motivated you as a young man to become involved in the anti-lynching campaign? What was it that was so passionate and powerful compelling about this issue for you?
Yes. Well, you see, I was born and raised within just right near Salisbury. I graduated from Salisbury High School, and Princess Anne is only about 15 miles down, and the family that lived there. So this was home to me. This territory was home. And when I knew it, there was a lot of goodwill and a lot of friendliness between the races. And when this thing occurred, it sort of knocked all that to pieces, and of course that aroused me very deeply and fundamentally in my whole attitude toward the citizens of the community, because we were friends, and here part of us had gotten on the wrong end of it, and it was pretty terrible.
So what did you decide to do?
Well, what I tried to do was to call attention to what should be done and how people should relate to one another, and hold up the ideal that we were all part of the family of God, and that the black man has as much right to his personal liberties and his views as a white man did, and that you can't have a citizenship in which you have two types of citizenship, a black citizenship and a white citizenship. There's only one American citizenship, and the black man has every privilege a white man has to fulfill whatever talents he has and whatever needs he strives to respond to. So my job was simply to try to hold up the American ideal and to apply it to the local situation. That was what I was trying to do.
Can you can you tell me how the people reacted when the Sun, H.L. Mencken and the Baltimore Sun came out with some pretty strong statements about the Eastern Shore? Can you tell me about how the Eastern Shore people reacted when they...
Well, the crazy thing was that H.L. Mencken is a stupid man. He called it all kinds of ignoramuses and people that gospel thumping, all that kind of stuff with names. He called it all kinds of names he could think of, and then expected people to pay attention to him when he said something positive. And of course what they did, they reacted to his negative statements, and his positive statements didn't catch on at all. And it was, well, you can't do that. You can't call a person a skunk and a scoundrel and then come and say, I want you to support me in this level or that level.
What specifically did the people do to the Baltimore Sun when the Baltimore Sun took a stand? What did the people on the Eastern Shore do?
Well, some of the people down there reacted negatively. They overturned his trucks, and they canceled some business and sent it north instead of carrying it on normal channels. And they threatened to do this on an extensive scale, but it never happened. It was only a slightly lived thing and never really had any fundamental impact on the situation, but it was threatening. And I suspect it could have been tragic. I mean, it could have, what they were threatening was to try to get Delaware to make our state a part of, the Eastern Shore a part of Delaware, and you see, change the whole political situation, but it never got anywhere. It was just talk.
Okay, we won't go into that. The people at Princess Anne claim that the lynching was done by outsiders. Do you believe that? I mean, is there any credence to that, or?
Well, the outsiders might have been people who didn't live in Princess Anne, but they lived in the county. They lived on the Eastern Shore. They didn't come in there from distances. It was local people who lived, we'll say, in the county or nearby. There weren't not people coming in from Western Shore or places like that. It was an Eastern Shore like Eastern Shore.
You were telling me before, in fact, this is what you testified in the Costigan Wagner hearings, that these things can't happen without local support. Can
Yeah, absolutely.
You tell me about that?
Well, any kind of reaction to a very controversial issue has got to reflect a strong public opinion of some type. And of course, public opinion is not a thing that exists alone. It is contradictory. I mean, some public opinion contradicts other public opinion, and you can't just use the word to cover the whole discussion. And what happens is public opinion in one section attacks public opinion in the other section, and you arrive at some kind of you have to eventually arrive at some kind of...
Can you tell me specifically about the people on the Eastern Shore and their attitude towards lynching, and whether you feel like this was an environment that might have supported it in some fashion?
Well, there's no question that the Eastern Shore people had a group of people that they really did it. They're the ones that did it, so it shows they approved it, or they wouldn't have done it. So there's a, well, I think it would be true of most any community in the United States. You find on any vital issue that people are radically divided. Some people believe in radical action in one direction, some in the exact opposite, and they're divided that way. Same thing happened in California. They had a big lynching out there, and the people were just on two opposite sides, and they fought each other out that way, and that's not unusual.
But you told me, can you cut for a second?
Yes.
Okay, so let's try it again, and just tell me about how those feelings that you have about that a community, for this to happen, a community, there must be some support for it in the community.
Yes, well, I think it's on the face of it, it's obvious. People wouldn't come and set up a lynching situation unless they believe that was a appropriate action to it. Otherwise they approve it, or they wouldn't do it. So the fact that a lynching mob gets in there, well, it shows that they feel that that is a viable way of handling a problem. Of course, people who are a little more detached and can look at the thing more objectively don't approve it. It doesn't mean that the community as a whole approves it on the Eastern Shore, and no, not true at all. But there was a minority there, and they had enough social approval that they were able to get away with it.
Great, okay, thank you. And you were can you tell me about your appearance? You don't have to go into a lot of detail, but just your exchange with that gentleman at the Maryland State Legislature hearings when you went in there, and he asked you who you were and where you came from, and can you tell me about that incident of yours?
Well, when I appeared before the state legislature, I was 30 years old, and the place had so many people to come support this bill we had introduced that it was supposed to be held in the Senate room, and they couldn't get in there. So they moved to the House of Representatives, and it was crowded to the deck. And we had there the cream of the black community, and we had in some of the intellectuals and some of the leaders in the liberal white community. For example, Elizabeth Gilman, whose father was the first president of Goucher College, she was there, and Margaret Young was there, who's a leading Quaker in a family, a multimillionaire family. I mean, there were people highly respected in the community, although they were a little liberal in their points of view. And so I was giving leadership to this particular point of view, but I did have back on me, not simply the liberal crowd. I had back on me some of the leading citizens of the state, and they saw the folly of this, and they were anxious to correct it, as was I. And
so what happened when you sat down in the chair?
You mean
when you sat down at the testimony and the man was talking to you, the state senator?
Well, I can't recall exactly.
Well, he asked you where you were from, and
oh yeah, he asked me where I was from, and that was in a hearing we had that crowded the whole House of Representatives. They couldn't get in the Senate. They crowded them out, and an enormous crowd of people there, and the cream of the crop of the black people, and the liberal community was there. People like Elizabeth Gilman, people there. It was a really very impressive group, and they had not selected their leader. But when they got together, they insisted that they wanted me to do it. I was 30 years old, and we had people there who had national reputations, who had been in this field a lifetime, but they wanted me to do it because I had recently published material in this field, and they felt that being younger was probably an effective thing. And the man who was chairman of it, he looked down at me, and he just couldn't understand this. That all these people who were nationally known and highly professional, had money, had prestige, had social thing, and here I was a 30-year-old kid coming there and trying to tell them what they thought, and speaking to their representative, couldn't understand it. So he looked down at me and said, "Son, where are you from?" He was sure I came from New England or someplace, not from Maryland. And so I said, "Salisbury, Maryland, where this lynching occurred," and the whole house burst into a great burst of laughter.
Great, thank you. Can you cut for a second?
Sure.
The library in there, I asked you, and you had a very good answer for why, if states had an anti-lynching law, why was it necessary or desirable to have a federal anti-lynching law? What was it about a national law that was so imperative?
Well, I think there are states and there are times within a state that laws action take place that is not socially approved and is not socially desirable. So I think if you take any issue, whatever it might be, whether it's race or economics or whatever it is, and you get a national feeling on it, then you have something that you can look to for guidance. So it's terrifically important to keep the national on this level. But sometimes the state leads the nation where they should go, and I think.
But you were telling me before. Okay, sorry. You were. We have to.
Take 4.
So why is a federal law important? Why was there such a movement for a federal law for this?
Well, the federal law, of course, would have precedence over the state, and federal law has a national reaction and international reaction. It holds up and gets a body of public opinion which no local community can support. You get millions and millions of people, and they become concerned about this, and even though it may not be entirely popular, if it's somewhere near the media or above the majority, above majority, it has enormous power. But so that's why a thing like that on a national level has such enormous effect on local situations. And of course, all these things are controversial, and it means there are people on both sides of the question who look at it more than one way.
All right, let me ask you, and this is the crucial question that we talked about in the library. What is it about lynching that moves you, that's so terrible? I mean, you have a feeling about there's something about the social fabric that's at stake here. Can you tell me about your feelings about that?
Well, lynching is an example of a community living by emotion and by prejudice and by their own personal standards, with no written or respect for individual rights. Even a man who's the greatest criminal, who's done the greatest crime it could possibly be thought of, no matter what it is, in the American system, if a man murders his wife and his children and family, the whole bit, he's still under American law is entitled to a hearing before an impartial court with a representative lawyer to represent him, to present his case. He has his individual rights, but in a lynching situation, you don't have a jury, you don't have to indict, you don't have a jury to try it, you don't have a judge to make determination. You have none of the legal machinery. It's simply mass action, and therefore is a very dangerous thing, because if it's right, why, I guess it would be all right, but the chances of it not being right, being unbalanced, is overwhelming, because it's just a mob like that without any controls and legal restrictions. They're not within the framework of American justice system, which requires the opposite, not just individual emotion pouring out in response to an individual situation, but requires.
Can we cut for a second?
Yes.
Okay, so my question is, and we talked about this before too, when you went to the Costigan Wagner hearings and you testified, did you feel like it was going to be successful? Did you feel like, or did it matter that it was successful? Was it just the fact of the hearing?
My material I presented to them was very brief. It's just, they were holding hearings there for, must have run a couple of weeks. And I sat there all day, I think maybe 2 days, and I got in touch with the person who was in charge of it. I said, I can't do this. I can't be running from Baltimore over here and spending 30 days running over here like this. I said, you have to tell me when I will be heard. So he said, well, tomorrow morning, first thing, you'll be on the air. So I went over there at 9 o'clock it was, and they put me on immediately, and then went back to the other work. But then that was in the file, and they, when they organized it, they put it in where they wanted to. But that's how I managed it, because I just couldn't spare the time.
Tell me what you thought, whether you thought this whole effort to have a federal lynch law was going to be successful. Did you think they would pass it? Did you think it would actually happen, or was it just making a statement?
Well, I think the thing I was involved with was a state law. I believe I was not involved with the one that was national law, and of course, state law would have the state back of it. The national law, I think, was another matter, and I don't remember just what my reaction to that was, or whether I testified there or not.
Well, you told me before that you thought like that even if a federal law didn't work, if it didn't get passed, that it had an impact on people.
Oh, there's no question in my mind that federal law
Can you
does
tell me
have,
that?
yeah, the federal law does have an impact, there's no question about it. There are many people who respect the thing that the federal law represents legal public opinion, one might say. And when you get law, it really is the fabric of our society. If we don't operate by law, then we operate by emotion, we operate by lack of protection of the individual. It's a very dangerous system. Law is, while it has its faults, its weaknesses, and sometimes people get very disgusted with it because it drags out and drags out, and you hear a lot of foolish testimony, but it's the only protection we have for individual freedom. Without law, there is no protection for individual freedom, for individual rights. And the law is really a sanctuary and a very, very important factor.
Great. Okay, thank you. Can you come up for a second?
Yes.
So tell us about the passion that was behind this, because people did say that when you were a young preacher, you were very impassioned about this stuff. What was?
Well, I certainly was, because to me it represented the whole heart of democracy.
You certainly were what? If you could.
I was certainly very much in favor of individual worth and individual personality and respect for individual personality. And when you get to the point where you have two societies and two laws, one for black people, one for white people, and you deny the black community the protection of the law of the white community just inherits by being white, then you set up an impossible situation, and sooner or later it's going to break down.
Right, but I want to know why you were so concerned. Why did it affect you so much? What was it about your background or who you were that had you so impassioned about this?
Well, I felt it was the essence of democracy. In other words, if you don't treat all citizens with the same respect the law demands for its best, then you have an oligarchy of some type.
Can you come for a second?
Yes.
Market?
All right? To me, this was the essence of religion, that you had respect for individuals, and it didn't matter whether black, white, rich, poor, good or bad. Even a criminal has rights. He has a right to be heard, and he has a right to present any defense he can think of. For example, a man may kill his mother and his children, but if he has a right to come in court and say, I was insane at that time, I was temporarily insane, and bring a psychiatrist in to testify that is correct. He has a right to bring personal defense, and I think that individual right is a very foundation of democracy. If you and to have the individual right to extend to all citizens is the essence of it also.
What would you say to the people who felt like, we have to protect our womanhood? We have women that we have to protect from these George Armwoods and these people, and this is the way we're going to do it. Was it?
Well, I think if they don't follow legal procedures, then they themselves are a bigger problem as the man who's committing the crime. I think the only way you can operate a society is to operate by rules that are imposed not in times of crisis alone, but in times of calm, reasonable expectations and standards.
So, what kind of a place was the Eastern Shore to grow up
Well,
in?
the Eastern Shore, as I experienced it, was more as a home-like thing, and the values of the family and the love of the people were all there, very sincere, very deep, and very satisfying. Now, the weakness of the Eastern Shore was that they had not come into the modern world. They had not given the Negroes the rights that they themselves demanded for themselves. And even my town, and they loved Tilly and Lottie, but they had to stay in their place. They had to be in the kitchen or in the washtub. They didn't have them to dinner and sit at the table with them. Or if they did have them, why, it wasn't, they didn't have them, they didn't attend the social meetings. They didn't get involved with the decisions. They were a minority and had very little say in the democratic process. They didn't vote for what large part. When they began to vote, they began to get some more rights, but in the early days of this movement, they weren't voting at all. They were, that's not correct, but very slight votes and very little political influence.
Okay, good. Cut for a second.
Yes.
With who?
With Walter White.
Oh.
Go ahead.
Well, my relationship with Walter White was at meetings I had with him personally at Hopkins University. The man who's in charge of Y there got him to come there to speak, and I attended the meeting, and after it was over, we went to this man with him, went to his home, and Walter White was there, and we had a long conversation, and so I had a real close personal contact with him, and it was,
What kind of a man was it, Walter White?
well, he was a brilliant man, there's no question about that, and he had a brother, well, I'm getting mixed up in my mind with the ones who were
Okay, Scott.
So tell me, so do you think there was some connection there with the Depression and the economics?
Well, I think that unquestionably economics had a big part to play in any social reaction. The whole community gets it, and see, I was operating in a rural community, and excuse me.
Okay. Good.
Did you change the camera number there? Camera roll 28?
Okay.
29.
29? Camera roll 29?
Okay, Lisa, okay, you're settled, right?
Yeah.
Good, thank you.
Okay, can you tell me again what the connection that you feel between the tough times and the lynching and the antisocial behavior, what those connections?
Well, I think when people have difficulty getting bread and butter and getting clothes that are decent to wear for your children and food on the table and, you know, the basic necessities of life, I think they tend to get a little disturbed, and I think that things happen in that environment that wouldn't happen if it were more prosperous times. I don't think there's any question or doubt about that. I think at times when the economic level is not such that it meets the normal demands of normal people, it encourages antisocial conduct. I don't think there's any doubt in the world about that.
Great. Thank you.
Great.